as we've moved forwards, we've seen that it's not just about pushing publishers to flip their portfolios. We are asking ourselves now, are we research libraries, institutions, funders, are we prepared? Are we preparing ourselves for a new paradigm in scholarly communication based on open? Are our institutions, our policies, our financial structures, our infrastructure, are they ready for that? That's where these agreements, these transformative and open access publishing agreements, are really more than just financial tools. They've become part of a broader institutional strategy, a way to make the shift deliberate and really change the mindset of our organizations. It's not just about paying differently. We're trying to align our investments in scholarly communication with our values, with the values of research.
Hello and welcome to insightsxchange, where we bring you conversations that shape the future of research, publishing, and education. I'm your host, Nikesh Gosalia, and today's episode is an important one for libraries, for researchers, and for the broader scholarly ecosystem. As open access continues to gain momentum globally, we are asking, are we truly transforming the system or simply changing the wrappers? What role should libraries play in the shift? And how do we avoid replicating old inequities in new models? To explore these questions, I'm thrilled to be joined by Colleen Campbell, one of the most influential voices in the open access movement. Colleen leads OA 2020, a global effort focused on accelerating the transition to open access. She has contributed to major initiatives like Project Deal and has been a strong advocate for library-led infrastructure and reform in scholarly publishing. Her work sits at the intersection of policy, publishing, and global equity, helping to elevate the strategic role of libraries in shaping a more inclusive and innovative scholarly communication ecosystem. Colleen, welcome to insightsxchange. It's a real pleasure to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm really honored by the chance to be here and talk with you. Thank you.
Brilliant. So let's get started. You've been deeply involved in OA transition initiatives like Project Deal and OA 2020. What's the most misunderstood aspect of these large-scale library-led negotiations, and how do you address these misconceptions?
Yeah, thank you. That's a fabulous question. Just to start, the scholarly communication landscape is so complex and involves so many different stakeholders that it's very easy for us to develop misconceptions. The knowledge, it was siloed. We all come at different stakeholders, authors, libraries, research administrators come at scholarly publishing from very different places, funders from very different places. And so we are still sort of learning about each other. And so there are a lot of misconceptions. I think that one of the biggest misconceptions that I encounter is this idea that open access negotiations, or which have been transformative agreements, and now we're already pushing to open access publishing agreements, are just about flipping publisher portfolios, taking all the journals from closed access to open access overnight, as if that would solve the systemic flaws of scholarly publishing as we know it today. I mean, to be honest, that was, this flipping of portfolios was part of the early vision. There's a logic to it. But as we've moved forwards, we've seen that it's not just about pushing publishers to flip their portfolios. We are asking ourselves now, are we research libraries, institutions, funders, are we prepared? Are we preparing ourselves for a new paradigm in scholarly communication based on open? Are our institutions, our policies, our financial structures, our infrastructure, are they ready for that? That's where these agreements, these transformative and open access publishing agreements, are really more than just financial tools. They've become part of a broader institutional strategy, a way to make the shift deliberate and really change the mindset of our organizations. It's not just about paying differently. We're trying to align our investments in scholarly communication with our values, with the values of research. Yeah, so that's a big misconception. Another one I think that's really worthwhile mentioning here is that a lot of folks who might not be deeply involved in the agreements themselves or negotiating or implementing them, they assume that these agreements reinforce or perpetuate publisher control and the dominance of large commercial publishers. But we really have to get back to what is the goal here of open access, and the goal of these agreements. Actually, it's about eliminating paywalls and increasing equity and making research more accessible, and therefore reorganizing institutional budgets around open publishing services. That is a powerful step, right, in the direction of reducing paywalls, increasing equity. It's not perfect, but it's certainly organizing our subscription investments around open access with these commercial publishers who publish journals where authors are going to publish their work. It's more transparent and more, as I was saying, more forward-looking than continuing to pay for closed content without any opportunity for influencing what is happening in the market.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that, Colleen. And maybe I should have started with this. In your opinion, do you think we've overly complicated this whole, open access movement with so many different business models, and maybe a majority of that is required because we are talking about a very, very niche and a complex area? There are so many stakeholders involved.
Right.
What is your view?
Right. I mean, from where I sit, we are, I would say, still in the first phase of transition. And at this point in time, I think it is wholly useful to experiment, first of all. So if I think just very simply about these transformative agreements, they themselves are an evolution. The initial attempt at integrating open access into our agreements with subscription publishers were agreements called offsetting, where costs for open access publishing were offset in the subscription agreement. Now we are at a phase where the negotiations are really repurposing the library investment to support open access publishing. But under that umbrella, there are many different kinds of agreements, and that is wholly appropriate because the library consortia and libraries who represent different research communities all over the world, they come at this with their own cultures, with their own policies, with their own structures. And so one size fits all is not going to work. Yeah, we need nuance. We need agreements that are customizable. In this time, in the past 20 years, since we've been talking about open access, many strategies have surfaced, of those that I just mentioned, and more. Why has that been necessary? Because to really arrive at full open access, and which is a gateway also to open science practices, only one strategy is not going to achieve that. In 20 years, where before we had transformative agreements, when efforts were focused on depositing author manuscripts in repositories or the development of new open access journals and portfolios, they had their success, but there was still that block of paywall journals that comprised, 80% of publishing, according to Web of Science. And of course, that's not all publishing, but it's a good chunk of publishing that was behind a paywall. So the point is, we need many facets to our strategy. And I think the exciting thing is that today, after 20 years, I think, or even more, I think we've gotten to a point where we're coming to the realization that thinking in terms of thinking of binary approaches are not the way to think about this, not the way to approach open access. We really have to approach open access in a way that is holistic. It's a change in our mindset. We want authors to be able to communicate their research openly in any manner that is useful and meaningful for them. So once you ground, your strategy and your approach in that notion, it just makes it simpler. It opens us up to integrating a multitude of strategies for openness.
Thank you for sharing that, Colleen. Libraries, as we know, are central to reshaping the publishing model. How has that shift changed the relationship between libraries, publishers, and researchers? And what challenges does it bring?
Right. Sure. That historically, libraries were just managing subscription agreements in the background. In recent decades, with the advance of digital technologies, I think a lot of researchers, library, what's a library, right? They just go on internet and find the content that they are interested in. But the open access transition is really, I think, creating opportunities for libraries. So they're stepping into a much more proactive and strategic role in the space of scholarly publishing. In the past, they were just took care of the transactions and built a collection, and the collection was there if the reader needed it. But this mindset that I mentioned earlier, it's about we don't have the problem of dissemination anymore. The internet has taken care of that. Now we are really changing the scope of what are the services we are even paying for, right? The services are services for scholars. We're supporting them in disseminating their research openly. And in that, therefore, libraries have this more strategic role. They're what we call the technical buyers of publishing services. That shift brings them really greater power and responsibility to shape the market, which is quite exciting. So beyond just pricing, which was what they were focused on before in the subscription world, now we see libraries really having influence through their negotiations, because it's that financial leverage that they bring to the table, influencing all manner of aspects related to providing these open access publishing services to authors. So influencing publishing integrity by advocating for clearer policies around peer review and editorial independence and ethical standards. So ensuring that open access publishing is not just open, but it's trustworthy. You see libraries, working on improving metadata standards and interoperability, which of course are, critical for discoverability, for citation tracking, and, research evaluation. They are getting involved in supporting authors with their workflows, the whole publishing process, making it easier and more streamlined for authors to be able to choose the least restrictive license for their work, CC BY in particular. So just a whole realm of different aspects to the scholarly publishing process, which is, as I said, a responsibility and an opportunity for libraries to really become strategic partners in scholarly communication for their institutions.
And double clicking on one of the aspects that you spoke about, Colleen, which was the transformative agreements. Are the current transformative agreements truly transformative, or are we still straddling two systems? And in your opinion, what milestones or shifts would signify a true systemic reform?
Okay. Wow. Yes. I get that question a lot, actually. Are these transformative agreements really transforming? It depends on how you look at it, right? Where I sit, the libraries and library consortia that are negotiating these agreements very much see them as instruments for transformation. They are enabling transformation, right? So, let's take a step back here. We talked earlier about this notion of flipping publisher portfolios and how it's rather, simplistic. But let's look at scholarly publishing generally. It's like research itself. It is a global endeavor. So the open access transition needs to happen on a global scale. That, of course, takes time. I like to think about it as sort of like a train traveling through a tunnel, where we have each research community from around the world needs to go through this transition on their own time. But we are all moving forward together. So if I look at the impact that transformative agreements have had for the communities that are negotiating them, we have some of the first movers, primarily in Europe, who've already made significant progress through the transition phase. They are already looking to negotiate agreements under which they no longer pay for reading, because reading access is not a service they're willing to pay for. The scope of the agreements should be open access publishing. And that means that we can completely remove the legacy elements to pricing, because pricing based on reading of the old subscription agreements was very opaque and riddled with inequities, as we are just now being able to see through these transformative agreements. So, we have Europe far ahead, but at the same time, there are research communities that started later negotiating these agreements, including in lesser resourced countries like South Africa and Colombia. I had a conversation with two library negotiators, consortium negotiators from these countries. And they have made important inroads by adapting transformative agreements to fit their local contexts. Just to give you a real concrete example, the Sanlik Library Consortium in South Africa began negotiating transformative open access agreements in 2019. Now, as of 2024, they have managed to shift around 80% of their research outputs, which were previously in paywall journals, to open access. I mean, that is just a remarkable achievement. This is part of that transformation process. A lot of publishing happens in the US and in countries of Asia. In the US, I see they're really now starting to integrate transformative agreements into their strategies, and that's having impact. And we also see them starting in Asia. So we have that shift happening now globally in terms of changing our investments. Now, that's the base part, right? What comes with that, right? Through this change in investment and through libraries being involved, this is enabling, I think, or at the same time, other reform. This cost transparency is key. That is improving. You have libraries supporting authors to publish with a CC BY license, so their content is completely open. That alleviates authors from the direct publishing costs. On top of that, we see, because of this breaking up of that lump sum subscription that happened in the past, we are now seeing greater investment in alternatives like library-led publishing and new models like Publish, Read, Curate, and wider use of registered reports and preprints. We see infrastructure being built like OA Switchboard, things that will help us improve coordination and transparency across the whole publishing ecosystem. I mean, that's to say that when it comes to systemic reform, I actually think, we need to get comfortable with evolution rather than fixed milestones. Scholarly publishing is very complex. The ecosystem is extremely complex, and it's constantly changing. If I may, I just want to mention two big influences in the landscape we have right now, and that is research assessment practices, which shape where and how researchers publish, and then the emergence of AI technologies, which are, already calling into question a lot of our current processes and raising new questions about access, reuse, and licensing. So the transformative agreements have initiated a certain transformation for funding, for the financing, for the CC BY, right? Growing CC BY massively. And, in parallel, we see other changes happening, but we have some big issues that are going to really, I think, shake things up further as we go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for sharing that, Colleen. In your opinion, because you've been so involved, what steps can be taken to ensure these open access models from high-income countries don't deepen global inequalities in research participation and even visibility?
Right. This is an important question that we are grappling with right now. And already that is a good thing, right? Because it means it shows the progress we've made. Because as I mentioned before, as long as we had subscription agreements, these always had non-disclosure clauses attached to them, which meant that there was no ability for the research community to compare pricing. Pricing, was really set at the start of this digital transition based on print subscription models. So really that pricing is just the root of a lot of our evils today. With this transformative agreements, open access negotiations, we have achieved greater transparency around the financial streams that are flowing to scholarly publishers for their journals. And that enables us, as I mentioned before, to have some conversations. Now, even though I mentioned before, you had this transition, this negotiating open access started in the global north, if you will. There are many countries around the world from what we would consider global south or lesser funded contexts that are also negotiating. I mean, they have had their subscription agreements in the past, and they want to participate in this transition. They want to provide their authors with the same opportunities. At a recent community, OA 2020 community meeting, a library consortium leader from the Global South articulated, his perspective right now, his experience. He said, and I'm going to quote here, when we enter open access negotiations, publishers love to remind us that our accessing of their closed subscription content increases by double-digit percentages every year. So that shows that we in our countries are still heavily dependent on paywalled content. And they do this to justify the perpetuation of high and increasing reading fees. But this library consortium leader said, I want to reply to that. Then you, publisher, go talk with those countries, those other countries, producing that paywalled content, and work with them to take responsibility for the final step of their research process. Because surely communicating one's research is the responsibility of the researcher or the researcher's institution. He continued saying that the biggest challenge for the Global South is that under the current legacy subscription-based pricing, the Global South is being asked to finance communicating the research output of the Global North. So if we are going to be able to participate democratically and equitably, we need to be able to read what the Global North is producing. So ultimately, his comment is really a call for institutions around the world to take this responsibility, right? To working within our own realm of influence. If we are all responsible for making our content open, we have ways then of making that equitable, right? With the transparency, we can start to see the pricing and have conversations about equitable pricing for open access publishing services, like differential pricing based on geography and purchasing power parity, to make sure that the institutions in less resourced regions can participate fully in open access publishing. That's just one aspect. But I think there are other ways that negotiators globally can influence the market, work with publishers to provide a more equitable system. Just as an example, I think about addressing more structural inequities like peer review processes that carry bias, looking at editorial boards that might lack equity or lack diversity, really raising with publishers through the negotiations these principles around equity and inclusion. That's when real change becomes possible, when negotiators around the world are having those same conversations.
Thank you, Colleen. And just very quickly, what are your thoughts about the whole initiative that India announced a while back, which is the One Nation, One Subscription? Do you think, and of course, everyone's still waiting to see how the implementation of that is done, but in terms of the intent, in terms of, what has been rolled out, what are some of your thoughts, Colleen?
Sure. I have to say it was a great honor to have representatives from the Chief Scientist's Office at the 16th Berlin Open Access Conference 2 years ago, right before One Nation, One Subscription came out in full. And she was part of those discussions. And so, there was a strong understanding of transformative agreements and open access publishing agreements and where the open access community was moving, the direction of travel there. But as I mentioned before, with this analogy of the train and working through this tunnel, I think it is fully understandable that in a country that is still working on enabling the reading access, for such a broad spectrum of institutions, that is fully comprehensible. And it's perhaps unrealistic to expect that in India, the country with a national strategy would leapfrog over the Europeans who have been doing this for 10 years and jump right into a fully open access agreement, right? It is a process, that tunnel. You need to understand the whole workflow, the whole mindset really needs to change. And so in the meantime, I say that I can say that we have conversations with members of the OA 2020 community and who are individual institutions in India who are negotiating transformative agreements for their authors because they have already, processed that mindset, that approach, and so are adopting this. And so I would hope, and I think I could fully see that in the future, one nation, one subscription might then be further integrating open access into their strategies going forward. It is a process. It is,
absolutely. How should libraries negotiate with commercial publishers while still maintaining leverage and serving researchers' best interests?
I think if you put the researcher at the center, then you cannot make a mistake. And here, getting back a little bit to what I was saying before, what has changed is that, and here I'm talking about journal publishing primarily. Okay, so sometimes I talk on in big terms, but of course we have to think about researchers of all disciplines, and we have to think about scholarly communication that is locally relevant, right? So I'm not addressing that specifically. I'm talking right now about that bulk of subscription spending that in any given country is going to a relatively small group of major publishers. Those are the journals where where institutions quite often want their authors to publish to, increase the research profile of the institution, et cetera. So focusing on that, what we have proven, what has been established over and over again, and this is documented. We have new tools like the ESAC registry of transformative agreements, which gives libraries and negotiators information on the different agreements being negotiated. It provides links to actually look at agreements to see how they're structured. What we can all do now is learn from each other. And the notion that what we invest today in scholarly publishing on a global scale is more than sufficient to shift to support open access publishing of those same journals. So that is the baseline, right? Now, in any research community, there are those institutions that maybe are very research intensive and those institutions that are teaching institutions. So it's up to that research community to, work together to understand how shall we redistribute this cost, recognizing the benefits of open access for our entire research community, right? Those conversations are happening and that, so that's great. But in the meantime, what has been proven is that it is possible. It is possible to negotiate an open access agreement that is cost neutral. So that is our starting point. It's our entry point. And from there, we work with publishers. We speak together with a global voice to raise the principles that are grounded in our approaches and work with publishers so that they uphold those principles in our agreements with them.
Got it. What strategies have you found most effective for engaging academic authors and faculty in supporting and driving the open access transition?
Right. Because that's something that I've learned in working here, is engaging with libraries and research communities around the world, is that there are different levels of readiness for open access. In some parts of the world, open access is still seen in rather a negative light because it might be associated with predatory publishing, for example. We need to work together as a community to address those concerns. And with authors specifically, I think really what we need to do is meet authors where they are, connecting open access to their core goals as researchers. So that starts with author rights. So if we explain to them that open access means retaining copyright over their work and gaining more control over how that work is shared and reused, I think faculty become much more receptive to the conversation. And here, I just want to highlight one example, because AI, right, is sort of a new topic in all of this conversation. When authors sign away their copyright to publishers, and whether that is with a subscription license, so completely giving up rights, or with a more restrictive Creative Commons license, that still leaves with the publisher the opportunity then to monetize that work. So publishers are able to make, $1 million licensing deals with big tech companies to train their large language models and AI tools on that research content. Now, some authors might not be very comfortable with that resale of their work being repurposed for the training of models. And through open access negotiations and giving authors, that support for retaining their rights and applying a CC BY license to their work, is mitigating that. It is, yes, making their work available for potentially publishers to, or potentially big tech, to use that content to train their models. But at the same time, it enables authors and the academy to do the same. So the academy can use CC BY open content to train their own large language models and reduce that reliance on big tech companies. So I think this is also something that really resonates with authors in understanding CC BY and the opportunities of open access. Beyond then, of course, the visibility of their work and enabling their peers everywhere to read and reuse their work, not just those in the institutions that can afford to subscribe to them.
What future OA models or library-led infrastructure initiatives are you most excited about? And what would you like to see go away or disappear?
Okay. I think I mentioned before, right now we are in a time of transition, which is a fantastic space for experimentation, right? So that, already there, I'm excited because we can experiment. We're no longer confined to this monolith of subscriptions. I see a lot of exciting innovation in the ecosystem. Platforms like eLife, journals like, F1000 Research, Peer Community they're sort of rethinking the peer review and publishing process completely, offering post-publication models and open reviewer reports and other editorial workflows that promote transparency and speed of dissemination of knowledge. That I find exciting. I think it's exciting to see a lot of scholar-led or community-owned publishing initiatives happening. Everything from MIT Press Direct to Open, University of California's Luminos program for monographs. Cielo and America go further, emphasizing bibliodiversity and multilingualism and public good of infrastructure, right, of dissemination infrastructure and open science. These are all fantastic new directions, and we should be investing in them, right? And that's where we get back to that mindset of our investments in scholarly communication, how they need to be oriented around open. Libraries have a key role here. And as I mentioned before, so we can become strategic partners in working with our institutions to help shape and plan those investment portfolios in open. I think we do have the challenges. Research assessment is one big challenge that we have to address as a community. So this is something that continues to trouble me. I would like authors to be free to publish wherever wherever they feel is most appropriate for research and in the venues that really represent their community. But if I get at what really most, I think what you said, what I would like to see disappear, I think that is inertia. Primarily, the inertia of business as usual, right? And this unwillingness to challenge the way we support scholarly communication that too often right now is, supporting commercial interests and propping up unsustainable models just because they are familiar. I think we have an opportunity right now. We've got a lot of momentum because of the past years. We have that built up. We have stakeholders that are more than ever engaged and aligned, right? The libraries and the research institutions and funders and authors, all, seeing beyond their silos that I mentioned at the start and can, really view the scholarly publishing landscape together. And I think that is the real opportunity here. So the inertia is tempting, but I really hope that the momentum can carry us forward now.
Before we sign off, is there one piece of advice or a call to action you'd like to leave our listeners with, particularly those in academic libraries or institutions still navigating their open access journey?
Wow, that's a tough one. Okay, my call to action, just a couple. The first is, if you are a library that is, has not yet thought about this, the starting point is data. It's understanding where your authors are publishing today and looking at the investments, and here are the investments of your institution, meaning what you are spending on the venues where your authors are publishing, and what they might be spending in APCs in the wild, as we say. That view, that transparency is the starting point for any conversation in any institution. Once you have seen that, and maybe your neighboring institution, or maybe your library consortium or your regional consortium, you do that same exercise and you look at that data together, this is where you can have conversations. And then from there, the call to action would be take that knowledge and have the conversation on a country level and on a global level. For example, within the OE 2020 community, but within other organizations that are, or initiatives that are focused on other aspects, focused on open monographs, focused on developing, the Diamond Open Access Capacity Hub. But it all starts with the data. So take that data as a starting point, have the conversations within your institutions on what does this tell us about where our authors are wanting to publish, how much is that investment costing us, what can we do to adjust that investment and reinvest in alternatives, and what can we learn from each other by sharing our experiences. That's my call to action.
Brilliant. Thank you so much for sharing that, Colleen. I've really enjoyed this, and I want to thank you for this enlightening conversation. You've really helped us to see how libraries are not just adapting to change, but they're leading it. And perhaps most importantly, how we can keep the open access transition aligned with values of equity, transparency, and global inclusion. And, to be honest, Colleen, it's not easy. It's very frustrating at times, and a lot of complexities and many, many reasons to probably not do something. But, you are a positive influencer and a motivator for so many in the industry. And so thank you so much for all the good work that you're doing.
No, thank you. That's very kind of you. It's been a great pleasure. And I have to say, the motivation I find personally is from, this wonderful community of libraries around the world that really come together to share and support each other. So yeah, thank you all.
No, thank you so much. And keep up the good work.
Thanks. Thank you.
If you've enjoyed this episode, don't forget to follow Insights Exchange for more conversations at the front lines of research and publishing. Until next time, stay curious and stay connected.